Did you know that June is National Aphasia Awareness Month? This is part one of a two-part series of Home Helpers Water Cooler Chat with Stephanie Lomazov. Stephanie is a bilingual, both Russian and English, medical speech language pathologist with clinical specialty and training in speech, language, cognition, and swallowing disorders. Stephanie is the founder and owner of Neuro Speech Therapy in Sarasota, Florida, and she's also on the board of directors with the Aphasia Community Center. Are you ready to learn more about aphasia? Let's go. So hey, Stephanie, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, Jonathan?
I am doing great. I just want to thank you for joining us today on this edition of Home Helpers Water Cooler Chat. So let's go ahead and dive into it. So first, Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit about what aphasia is?
Yes, that's a very common question that I get all the time in my practice. So, aphasia is a condition that typically is a result of something after a stroke or a brain injury. And it's a condition that's acquired and it affects language. So, the best way I can explain it is it affects all aspects of communication, whether it be talking, reading, writing, understanding information. But what it doesn't impact is intellectual ability. So a lot of people always wonder if it's an intellectual based condition, but it really is all about communication. And that's what aphasia is. It's a disorder of communication.
As a follow-up to that, so what causes aphasia and how common is it in the world or in our community?
Yeah. So, like I said before, aphasia is most typically as a result of a stroke. I do have patients who experience aphasia after a brain injury, different conditions that would affect the brain in general. But most commonly, it is after a stroke that would lead to somebody to having aphasia. And it's quite common. About 25 to 40% of stroke survivors actually have this condition of aphasia afterwards. And it affects a large group of people. In America, I believe it's 2.5 million Americans actually have aphasia after a stroke, which is more common than Parkinson's disease or even cerebral palsy. So it's a very common condition. And the crazy thing is that it affects so many Americans, but about 85% of Americans actually don't even know what aphasia is. But it's a very common condition as a result of a stroke typically.
Okay, so Stephanie, are there different types of aphasia? And if so, what are they?
So, aphasia is actually pretty diverse in regards to how it comes about in each individual person. There's technically 8 different kinds of aphasia, and it's typically broken down into 2 main categories. We have fluent aphasia and non fluent aphasia. Most commonly, you'll see people with non fluent aphasia, and that's basically where somebody has a really hard time just getting words out. You'll notice that the person just doesn't really talk very much. Their speech is very halting, very cut off, and maybe they only get 1 or 2 words out at a time, if that. And then you have fluent aphasia, which is really the complete opposite. And that's where a person's very fluent, meaning they talk like nothing's really wrong, but it's word salad. So it's just random jargon words will come out, filler words, but you really don't know what they're talking about the entire time. And that's fluent aphasia. Both affect language, just in different capacities. And then with that, there's also the branches off of those categories that also affect your writing, your reading, your understanding of things. So you might have a conversation with somebody who has aphasia and they sound perfectly fine, but they really don't understand what you're telling them. So it can be in either direction, but it has such a variety in terms of what you might see with somebody who has aphasia.
So let me ask you, so I guess there's a recovery period for aphasia in some cases. So how long can it take to recover from aphasia?
That really depends on the person. Yeah, I get that question a lot from families and from patients. What's the time frame of recovery? Unfortunately, it's not like a muscle where it'll heal. We can give a specific time frame. So it really depends. We have some people who have aphasia symptoms that might only last for a few months, and then they recover really well from that. But there are cases where if somebody is not recovering after maybe 2 to 3 months, it's more of a progressively longer condition that could take years or even decades to recover from. So really improvement is quite slow, but there has been evidence to show that even though it might be slow, it incrementally does get better, but it can be a lifelong condition for some people.
So, and you've been doing this for a while. Can you tell us about any memorable moments or success stories that you have personally seen when working with those with aphasia?
Yes, absolutely. Each person that I work with is so unique and special. And I have, such a variety of patients that I've seen over the years that have made so much growth and progress, even with, starting off with a really severe, like non-fluent aphasia, like we described, where it's just few words. A memorable case that I worked with, a patient that was near and dear to my heart. He was one of my very first patients that I ever worked with aphasia. And he was a really kind, brilliant professor, actually, in engineering. And he had this stroke that landed him, with this condition of aphasia where he was very few words, far in between, and wanted to get back to being a professor in engineering. And so that was his goal. So we worked together for 2 years, and we actually got him back into the classroom as a professor. And with some modifications and adjustments and teaching the students how to engage with him, he got back to being a teacher and a professor in a really big university for engineering. And it just gave me that inspiration that you can live with aphasia and you can get better. It just takes time and a lot of perseverance. And in his case, he was one of those really kind of shining stars in my mind of somebody who lived so successfully with aphasia.
Wow, that's a great story, Stephanie. That's a great story. Well, listen, that's all the time we have for today, but we're going to invite you back for part 2 that we're going to share here in the next few days. So, Stephanie, thank you for joining us today. And until next time, to our audience, stay hydrated with great conversations from Home Helpers Water Cooler Chat. Take care.